Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of our Raising the Brand series here at Private Equity Marketeer, where we delve into the stories and strategies behind the leading brand builders and capital raisers in private markets. I'm Matt Curtolo, Advisory Council member and longtime LP turned GP advisor. Been working with Private Equity Marketeer since its inception about 2 years ago. And we are super excited and thrilled that Sophie Buonassisi joining us today. She's the SVP of Marketing at GTMfund. GTMfund backs early stage companies with an LP base made up of some of the world's top go-to-market operators. GTMnow, the media arm, tells their stories behind how category-defining companies grow. Together, they've created something rare, I think, a fund with a living, breathing audience and a brand that feels more like a movement. So we're going to talk a lot about how it was built and what the rest of us can hopefully take away from that. So, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And what an intro. Thank you, Matt.
Absolutely. Well, all of it is true. So we're going to run with that. And, I think maybe the first part of this is we can start with, just tell us about your journey from operator to go-to-market expert to now your current role at GTMfund.
Yeah, you bet. Really, I was operating. So I was leading go-to-market in the MarTech space specifically and absolutely loved it. Really enjoyed the journey, scaled company for about 4.5 years. And the customers that we served were mostly mid to enterprise stage companies. And that was a ton of fun, but my heart was just always in startups. And so I was always advising startups, consulting with startups, involved in the startup ecosystem locally, remotely, involved in incubators on the side and so forth. So just really passionate about the area. And it was that passion that led me to full pivot and dive into the startup space through GTMfund.
Awesome. And maybe just a little bit more, I gave a brief intro on GTMfund, but maybe you could just tell us at a high level sort of how you're executing, what sort of companies you're investing in, how it's operating.
Yeah, absolutely. So GTMfund's an early stage venture firm. We're investing in the top B2B SaaS founders globally and really supporting their journeys as they scale out some really, really interesting missions there. We're supporting them alongside 350 operators. So we actually have a community of operator LPs. These are people that have been there, done that. So think of, the CRO of G2, the CMO of Carta, for example. And they're able to really work hands-on with portfolio companies to ensure that they are executing on their go-to-market to the best of their abilities. Because really, as tech modes decline, it's your go-to-market that differentiates and determines your success trajectory. And then we also have a media component to the firm called GTMnow, which you called out in the intro. Thank you for that. That really helps to share and democratize access to go-to-market information. So we're really speaking to the how of company growth. And as tech modes decline, like I mentioned, it is that how that is so, so important. So that's what we're really looking to surface. We can really aim to surface a lot of information from our portfolio companies, from the greater ecosystem, and really just help everyone with their go-to-market.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's so interesting, right? The strategy as well of thinking about people who are in the weeds, who are doing this or have done this very recently as both your investors, as folks who can help. And GTMnow, to me, is a wrinkle that I said the word rare early on. I don't know if there's many folks who have this sophisticated or this established of a media brand as part of their strategy, as their own go-to-market. On Raising the Brand, we talk to folks who are, investing, who are building funds, who are building firms, who are thinking about getting the message out on how firms invest. That could be the biggest, the smallest, and everything in between. I'd be curious to understand sort of how you thought about the launch of GTMnow and how you determined like this is the strategy that we want to pursue as part of the overall GTM platform.
I hear you. It's definitely becoming more common. We're seeing it pop up across the venture capital community overall, but it is rare for firms to start off heavy on media and really prioritize that from the gate. And it truly dates back to our long, long roots through our general partner, Max Altschuler. So in 2013, he actually started a media company himself called Sales Hacker. And over the course of 10 years, he built it into a thriving digital media company. In essence, it was kind of the living, breathing sales encyclopedia for the future of B2B sales. So grew to, I believe it was about 175,000 global members. And then in 2018, Sales Hacker was actually acquired by software company Outreach. They're Seattle-based. So that experience of growing a media company and seeing the impact of media firsthand from scaling Sales Hacker, we knew when launching GTMfund that media would be an important aspect to build out. We understood the importance of distribution. So alongside launching the fund, we actually started a newsletter and a podcast, and they both grew quicker than even we anticipated, which proved the value in media and supporting GTMfund. And then it truly is a full circle story, because whether it's, serendipity, fate, however you want to call it, the option of buying Sales Hacker back actually opportunistically came up, which was like kind of a wild moment, because when does that ever happen, first of all? And then second of all, when Max sold it to Outreach, he said, like, without an idea of when or why, that one day he would buy it back. So it truly did come full circle, and just considering the speed at which GTMfund grew and our understanding of the importance that media would serve the fund, we bought it back. So at the end of 2023, GTMfund reacquired, if you will, Sales Hacker, and then relaunched it as GTMnow.
Gotcha. Well, it's a great story too. And I think there's this idea that I want to pivot into, is, which I think a lot of people will be interested, is this idea of community and capital, right? So you've got your LP base, the GTM leaders that are part of that ecosystem, but then you have content. So I think a lot of firms that we talk to, that I know, that many of us in the ecosystem are engaged with, they struggle to connect the dots between those three areas. So I'm curious how you design, whether it be the fund or GTMnow, and how the content sort of fuels the community, how the community fuels the fund. How does that all interact? I'm so curious.
Yeah, excellent question. It really is that connectivity that creates the magic, or has the ability to create the magic if it's executed on well. So we really think of it as a flywheel. So fund, community, media, everything turns to support the fund in our portfolio companies, the firms that we're investing in, but ultimately so much value is added to everyone involved in every part of the flywheel along the way. So if we were to break that down, obviously we've got the fund, but then the community side, one of the pillars of the flywheel, it's really been there since day one. And this is becoming a common theme because it really dates back to a lot of our roots. But it's been an integral part of the flywheel feeding the fund because we got involved in community early. So it shows itself in every facet of the business. You can see the impact directly from portfolio company success, founder awareness and introductions, VC co-investor connections, media reach, brand perception. Like, you really do see it everywhere. And part of that was because, by and large, when you're growing a media company like Sales Hacker, you create community within that. And so when we say we saw the impact of media firsthand, we also saw the impact of community firsthand. And they often go hand in hand. And so for us, it was not a one without the other. It was really, here are these areas that can triangulate value, and we'll create them and build them in a way that feeds the fund and creates a flywheel. So community has been baked in since day one. Our first fund was actually 65 of our closest executive friends pooling together capital, and it was done on a rolling fund via AngelList. So that's actually how we got started. And part of that was to prove out two sides of a hypothesis. One is, do founders want go-to-market help? Our hypothesis was yes, because tech moats are declining, but you don't know. You need to actually prove and validate that out. And then the other side was, do actual go-to-market executives want to diversify beyond their W-2s? Do they want that kind of diversification that being involved in venture capital does? And a whole part of that premise was, when building Sales Hacker, Max saw firsthand, there's a lot of, really incredible operators. There were some CROs, for example, that went to startups that didn't materialize. And then you'll have a CRO go to, the next Salesforce and have an incredible exit. And is it always a reflection of the ability of each person? No. Oftentimes it's luck of the draw, and it really is a power law. And so how do you help people that are just incredible builders and have the ability to help scale companies get that diversification in turn? So those were the two parts of the hypothesis. And then pooling together capital from, 65 or so of our closest friends was a way of validating that. And both sides just went gangbuster. And so it was after that that really validated the idea and led us to actually raise an institutional fund and further it.
Sure. Flywheel is such a great word. And as you described it, right, these are not two sides. Like we say, this isn't just a fund. This isn't just a media company. You could separate these, and I'm sure they could survive as independent entities. But what you just articulated is, right, they're almost, they're symbiotic in terms of, I say it's compounding in terms of what each of these can do for each other. one of the interesting things is because these are both such massive operations in terms of area that needs to be covered and work that needs to be done, you have a relatively lean team, right? I mean, so just in GTMnow alone, you have the newsletter, podcast, the website, the community. How do you make sure everything gets done in that context to the highest and best ability and still kind of interweave back into the platform itself?
And another excellent question. And it really does tie into how we design the flywheel. So that efficiency is created by design. So we talked about pillar number one, which was community. The other pillar is media. And part of that is how we create the efficiency. So, I mean, benefits are massive of media, just to touch on those before we get into the how. But, big part is brand visibility. To be able to stay top of mind for people and for the best founders out there, you really do need to show up. You need to show up online. You need to show up in person. You need to show up with value. And so through the newsletter, podcast, social channels, website, we're able to dramatically increase GTMfund's brand visibility. And this helps us stay top of mind for founders. So when a founder thinks about who to bring on their cap table, we want them to immediately think of GTMfund. And so for anyone applying this, vice versa, you want to show up first and be the first person that they think about. So it enables us to also amplify the thought leadership of our go-to-market limited partners, so the executives in our community, to support their professional goals and careers, and also provides meaningful distribution for our portfolio companies. So just to complete that flywheel, to your former question, that's really how it all comes together and operates together, is they're all connected and feeding each other. And we think of them as, the fund, community, and media all under the firm. And so that's part of it. Now, to create that scale and efficiency, you asked, how are you doing this with a lean team? There's several different areas that we've leaned into. One is technology. One is more of the systems that we build. And 3 is the people. So from the technology side, one of the areas that we did 2025 and executed on was a proprietary AI system called XVal. So we built this. It gives us tremendous advantage. We've got such a great competitive or advantage or leverage built through the community and media components of that flywheel, in addition to the fund. But in 2025, we built XVal, and it stands for exponential value, because ultimately the media community fund, they give us an edge. But now we're really layering on our proprietary AI infrastructure, and that's trained on the data that we uniquely have access to. And so this stack helps us match talent, capital, go-to-market support faster. It helps us route the right intros in real time. It makes sharper, more opinionated investments overall. It helps us. So it triangulates a lot of the data that we have. It's AI trained on our own ecosystem, and it's really just designed to make us better investors, better partners. And so when you ask about efficiency, that's a big part of the technology stack of how it enables it. It really triangulates our network online ecosystem and the media assets. And what we're really looking to do is not create, a 1 + 1 = 3. We're looking to create a 1 + 1 + 1 = 10. And that kind of compounding advantage is where we see AI and building these and investing in these proprietary systems really helping to take us. So that's on the technology side. That's one of our systems. It's our most sophisticated system. It is like a full custom build. We also have tons of other technologies that we leverage for efficiency. So for example, AI systems, agents that we built on the content production side. Happy to go into those, but that would be bucket number 1 is technology. Bucket number 2 is systems. So a lot of the systems that we create, I think about everything in a scaling system is I want to do everything manually initially. Everything, because you need to know how the sausage is made before you actually scale it to a production house or anything of the sort. So we will spend a meticulous amount of time stamping everything ourselves, like going through the content side, the community side, handpicking everything, every minute detail ourselves. And then we'll look at our system and say, what can we actually automate here? What can we create greater efficiency around? And oftentimes they're, some of the less kind of sexy things that are as exciting about talking about. XVal is obviously beautiful and shiny, but like some of our efficiencies come from like these really minute things where it's more of the routing. So for example, we've got automated routing for our document creation creation process on the podcast, on the media side. So every time that we add a new guest to a spreadsheet, an agent comes in and creates a new document and a new column because it's picked up that there's a new row created, and it will run the research process, populate a research document for us, and put it into that column. And we layer everything on with humans. So we'll actually go in and add anything to that research document. But when it can take you from 0 to 50%, when previously you were starting from 0, it is a pretty big efficiency win because these things compound and speed up together. So that's more of the systemization, and it does rely on technology a lot of the time. But that would be bucket number 2. And then bucket number 3 is people. I have to give massive credit, and truly the whole credit, to an incredible team that we have. So we are small but mighty, like you said. We're 7 people at our organization as a whole, and everybody really contributes to every part of it. And so because it's a flywheel, because everything is interconnected, so is everyone's work. Even though we've got our specific areas and domains that we own and work in, everybody supports each other. And so whether it be somebody's working on their domain, we've got an incredible team on the media side. Tatiana and Joanne do an incredible job across everything. But it's also everybody working to support that, whether it's distribution, so helping to amplify media, whether it's ideation contribution. So we source our ideation on the media side from a variety of different sources. And one of those is the conversations that people have, because everyone at our firm is talking to hundreds of founders. And so there's such a rich repo of knowledge, of understanding of pain points. And so we'll actually surface those in systemized ways. Same thing with podcast guests. Somebody might have a really interesting conversation with somebody or hear about somebody and make a recommendation. So everybody's constantly engaged. We think of our team kind of like symbolic of a flywheel where everybody's helping to contribute to other parts, even though we're also owning and executing in our own individual domains. So truly, nothing is possible. Nothing's possible without the team behind it. And we're so fortunate just to have incredible humans at GTMfund.
That's an incredible answer. We could spend time kind of pulling each of those pieces apart, but maybe to put a finer point on it, when you think about a strategy like this, I would use the word that you have to be intentional about all the components that you're creating, and you start with the people, right? So for any other firm, and I want to ask you about things that you might do or not do and lessons you've learned as you've built this. But one of the things is just understand that you can't go into this without a plan. You really need to be intentional about what you hope to achieve. And that may even be a question I want to ask you in terms of ROI, how you actually measure, how you set goals, how you measure them, how you track them across all these interesting vectors. And to your point, how does it feed into not just the media platform, but the fund and the flywheel and all of this? So I think maybe just to put the point around what you just said, intentionality and design of what you're trying to achieve. But we maybe skipped over the first part of it, which is how do you start with the goals and then figure out the ROI on that?
Yeah, super important to always start with the goals. And so, for each individual firm, if anyone's thinking about it, it really is the first step of setting that goal. And it might look different for every firm or anybody doing so. I'll give you an example for us. The goal of the media company, number 1, is to help us stay top of mind for founders. And so what that looks like when we think about a goal and then how everything breaks down to certain KPIs is I actually have everything originating down to 3 different points. So we actually have 6 goals of the media company. The success of all 6 of those goals can be attributed to 3 things. 1 is audience growth, because the more people that you can actually reach, the more people that you can help with your content, with your assets. And so that's a big goal for us, is how can we reach and connect with more people? And that also creates a flywheel effect in itself, where it's a feedback loop. The more people that we're able to actually engage and get in touch with, the more feedback that we get of what are the pain points, what are people thinking about, what's helpful for them, what's top of mind. The second point is brand positioning and influence. Yes, we've got our audience growth, which is a lot more quantitative in nature. This is more of a qualitative metric. And so how we measure that is really by brand association. What are people saying? We take a lot of screenshots. We then take the data of those screenshots and measure, is it an increase of quality? A lot of that is a lot more qualitative in nature. You have a good pulse and understanding of how it's positioning and how your brand is being perceived. So number one, audience growth, quantitative. Number two, brand positioning and influence, qualitative. And then for us, we also have a monetization metric, which is number three. And that's because we do actually have sponsors on our media company. It allows us to amplify the distribution for a lot of companies that we are truly big fans in, and we're able to work with their technology and help spread that. So that's a third part for us because we run everything at cost. We're not trying to profit by any means, but it helps us do more on the production side. It also helps enable a lot of our community initiatives that otherwise venture firms running these kind of activations may have to take from other places, and we do not want to do that at all. So we run everything through the platform side via the sponsorships on the media side.
Awesome, Sophie. So I'd add to intentionality, organization, and structure, thinking about all of the things, the inputs that you have that boil down to those 3 points. I mean, that it goes without saying that with a lean team, in most firms are not dealing with a massive media company. Usually it's a person or two. So when you think about how do you get the most bang for your buck, it starts with defining what you're doing, then building an intentional process to hopefully achieve those goals. And maybe you could speak to how often you revisit those KPIs, adjust them, modify them, and sort of track towards them. What's kind of your regular cadence there?
Just like you would operate a SaaS company. So we operate every aspect of our business in the same way, where we've got goals, we've got KPIs, we're then measuring and evaluating them. We've got metrics. We're measuring them often every day on the media side, often weekly for other metrics. We report out to the entire team. Everybody reports out on every part of the function on a biweekly cadence. And that's more of like a full teardown of everything. So everybody is very involved and aware of all the different evolving parts of the business. So that's a biweekly cadence. In terms of like true roadmap iteration, that's more quarterly. So we're looking at our content calendar. We're looking at other aspects on a quarterly basis. Our events, for instance, run on a H1, H2. So twice a year will we actually set the calendar. We're constantly iterating around the execution of those events, but in terms of the dates, the types of events and so forth, that's usually twice a year. So one for H1, one for H2. So totally depends on which part of the business, but we generally, I would say, mirror how you'd operate a SaaS company. A lot of us are former operators, and we think of it in the exact same way. Like we're operating a business in the same capacity. So it very much so mirrors that process with goals, KPIs, timelines, and measurement for all of them.
That's great. I think it's great advice for all folks is to just think about this in that structured way, have accountability on a lot of this stuff. Because I'm sure you could speak to it, but you can waste a lot of time doing things that don't ultimately add a ton of value, or it's very difficult to measure. That's not to say don't do those things, but I think one of the things I've taken away from just the first part of this conversation is how much thought goes into designing an effective process and making sure that, you're not locked into, we're doing this one thing one way. You talked about technology, you talked about team and systems. I think those are all lessons that folks could take out and apply into their own organizations. And so I think you've given some really great tactical points here, but maybe I could go up one layer and think about, you talked about brand a little bit, but if you think about private markets, right, you're dealing in early stage venture, right, in a very specific area, but what do you think, firms in private markets underestimate about how much brand actually means? Maybe you could speak to it from your lens, but maybe even more broadly.
Yeah. Brand matters a ton. Brand matters a ton, and it's often the things that are more challenging to measure that drive disproportionate impact. I think of brand as an efficiency accelerator. So if you think about, if you're trying to, for anyone, attract more founders or attract more investors or any of your objectives, just like any kind of good sales process, what brand does is it layers and sits on top of your pipeline, adding an efficiency metric. And what that efficiency metric is totally depends on each funnel, each company. Maybe it's 2x, 3x, 4x, like what have you. It really, really will vary in that capacity. But that's ultimately what it's doing, is it's sitting, shaping perception at the core. Like your brand is how people perceive you. And people take action based on how they perceive things. So it is very, very important. Does that mean that people should be pouring 100% of their resources into brand? By no means am I saying that. That allocation of resourcing will depend on each company and each goal, but it is super, super important. And one thing I'll really emphasize and to note about brand is every single person at a company is a node for brand, especially now when we're leaning into individuality and humanizing really sales processes, because in great part of AI's acceleration and necessitating that, like each person, every single interaction that somebody has with your brand, whether it's through a human or not, shapes their perception. It's kind of like an ongoing reserve where like you're depositing a cent or 10 cents every single time somebody has a touch point. Probably that number maybe goes up to $1 will vary based on the degree of involvement of that brand touch point or what it is. But that entire deposit and what it actually adds up to is your brand. And so it's in every evolving thing that is really, really important to feed and to think about and be really intentional about. I will preface that with, any good founder and investor will see through any kind of brand facade, however. So brand is not a replacement for anything. It supports efficiency metrics that you can layer on. So the most important thing at the end of the day from the investment side for anyone really is performance. At the end of the day, as a venture capital firm, that is what we're doing on behalf of our limited partners, on behalf of our founders, is helping to support the growth of software companies and return funds to our limited partners and investors. So no amount of brand will replace that. That is number one, is performance. Brand is, something that you're fortunate to be able to build on top of great performance.
Yes, it's a great point. I think that I always say that the problem with performance in venture capital, of course, is it takes, half a decade or more for that to materialize. But relationships always precede performance, and that extends to brand. So if you can have great interactions with folks, I guess even more so, it's awareness, right? Of understanding that all these touch points are going to be measured by your audience, whichever that pool of stakeholders is going to be, whether that's your LPs, in your case, whether that be all of the community members. You have to be aware of all of those things in the interaction. I want to use that to ask you a question about content and authenticity. That's a word that we throw around a lot, but from the idea of making sure that the message that you're delivering across mediums is most reflective of who you are and how you want to be perceived. How do you do that both maybe at the earliest stages and then as you scale? How do you maintain that authenticity of message?
That's a really interesting question. I'm actually really excited maybe to revisit the question down the line, a year, 2 years, 3 years, because we will be constantly evolving this. We're about 2 years into the media company, for example, which is crazy to think it's only been 2 years. We're going to keep doubling down in that area. But overall, a few additional years in as a firm, and authenticity at the core doesn't really change, or I don't think it should change, at least. Is it genuinely reflective of your beliefs, of your values, or a value that you believe is helpful for other people? Like, it has to just really originate. And I think that's the key piece of authenticity, is the origination.
Sure.
Like, does it truly originate with your beliefs? I don't think that needs to be that it's a novel concept that you've created from scratch. There's kind of two sides of it. So there's original content, for instance, or original thought leadership. Maybe that's originating from your own beliefs that haven't yet made it to the greater kind of ecosystem or been popularized yet. So there's that side, but that doesn't always have to be the case. It can be really authentic to read something online and be like, this greatly resonates with our brand, and we want to put forward more thought around this lens also. But it's understanding, like, what does it mean, and imputing that for ourselves or yourself, and then sharing that from that lens as opposed to regurgitating anything. So making sure that any idea, content, anything, if it is truly authentic, it's originating from the source, whether it be new or absorbed information, is super important. And I'll just add, on the content side for us, we produce a lot of content through GTMnow. Some of it is really original content that has been, areas that we'll sit down and we'll jam on topics and we'll map them out on a whiteboard and record the session and then turn it into content. Like, that is truly original content. But some of it is not original content. It's actually stories, lessons, insights that were packaging in a way that we authentically believe will help add value to our audience. So maybe it's uniquely packaged. For example, we're doing a lot of go-to-market deconstructed pieces around companies so that in writing, people can understand, how did this company scale? Is that information about how a company scaled unique to us? No, it's actually unique to that company. But what we're trying to do is extract that knowledge, package it in a way that authentically feels valuable to our audience, and then distribute it to our audience to help more people learn from those. So hopefully those examples are helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. I want to pivot and ask you a question talked about AI and the amount of AI generated content. And as that continues to grow, how do you square that with authenticity, right? Can you use the tools that are becoming increasingly available to us and still make that authentic, right? The efficiency gain is massive. It still could originate from your own values and thoughts, but is it perceived differently? I'm just curious your opinion.
I think we're at an inflection point where it is perceived differently right now, but I don't necessarily think that it will for long. I think things are pivoting, and right now you see a lot of AI power behind the value proposition on websites when you go there. At a certain point, there's a reckoning where that just becomes the status quo. And the same thing likely happens with certain arts. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to, but a normalization of AI utilization. So for content production, for example, it will become more normal and widely accepted that content is produced with support of AI. Does it need to be from AI? Depends what type of content. There's a lot of short form informative content where you can very evidently see that captions, for instance, are created based on the description of the video and AI interpreting it, and AI is automatically populating that caption. But it's informative. Like, the purpose of that piece of information isn't to add unique insight or value or a lens. It's actually to inform. And so in that use case, I personally don't have anything against the kind of value, because the same value is being provided to the audience. That's what it boils down to is the value there? I think the same thing will happen with a lot of more firm content productions and so forth that we'll see populating private and public markets, where it's, teams are producing content with AI as an assistant, as long as the value, the number one thing is, as long as the value is still there, if not higher for the audience, probably okay. If the value is compromised, that's where it becomes a problem. Or if the authenticity is compromised. So leveraging AI is not necessarily taking away authenticity. It might just be purely speeding up efficiency of a unique thought or anything of the sort. So I think a blanket statement is hard to make. I do think we'll see a bit of a reckoning where people are more widely accepting of AI.
I think that's a great way to characterize it, right? It's about leveraging the tools rather than replacing the independent, original, value-added thought and insights that you can be getting from that. So love that, Sophie. But we're coming up on the end of time here, and we always have a bonus round that we like to ask our guests. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. The first one is what's your favorite brand outside of the private markets?
Any brand, like consumer,
Any
B2B
brand,
SaaS. Oh gosh. I mean, it's probably not a novel one, because I think a lot of people are fans, but I'm a big fan of Patagonia.
Sure.
I think they're a brand that have proven commercial success, and conviction-led storytelling can coexist in harmony. So they're pretty crystal clear about what it stands for, and they build products to actually earn that long-term trust. So it shows when a company's actions consistently match its values. And I think that's inspired a lot of brands too. That's one of my favorite parts, is not only how they operate, but the impact that it's created for so many others. And like I said, it's probably just not myself saying that. I'm sure you may receive some similar answers. I know I've sat at dinners where everybody's chatting about their favorite products, and Patagonia comes up many times. And I think that's part of the area and aspect that I appreciate the most, is actually the impact that it's had on inspiring other people to be able to marry commercial success and conviction-led, impact-led storytelling.
That's great.
And impact.
For sure.
So that'd be one. I've got a little bit of mixed feelings around this brand, but I think what they do is super cool. Lego. So I think
Sure.
it's a great, great example of just a timelessness, plus reinvention. Like they've protected their unique essence from the beginning, the creativity, imagination, possibility, but they've constantly refreshed formats in a way that still doesn't actually gravitate away from its original experience. So it's so unique around its value that the balance, like that balance is really hard to sustain, and they've done it just tremendously over time. So I really love their iteration, innovation over time, and how they've stayed true to the original product. That said, I think they also produce a lot of less environmentally friendly. It's almost like the antagonist of Patagonia. I think
Sure.
the bricks are mostly, made from plastic and petroleum-based material for durability, fit, all the things that they have done for a very long time. It probably produces, I think I've read a stat, about like 100,000 tons of plastic per year.
Wow.
Of converting into Lego. So that's the part I don't appreciate and love as much.
Sure.
So if I were to separate those would be different things. But
Of course.
Those
are great
I
answers.
do love part of it. Yeah.
That's great. What content format do you think more investment firms should experiment with? You cover all the bases, so I'd love your opinion on this.
There's a lot of deep dive interview style. A lot of deep dive interview style content from venture firms, ourselves included. That is our style also. So I think where I'm really interested to see is where it evolves beyond that, and who can capture probably short form video in a way that's resonant and educational. Maybe it's founder stories, for instance, without the deep dive component, but that tells a little bit of an insight-driven overarching as opposed to a deep dive. And the reason I'm so interested in that style is because I haven't seen it done well in the venture space. You can see it across more consumer, educational brands, but not in the venture capital space as much. We really lean into one format very heavily, again, ourselves included. So I'm excited to see what comes beyond that format overall.
Definitely. I think that is, we're going to see more of that coming soon, hopefully executed well.
It's harder to produce. That's a
Yeah.
big part of it. It's harder to produce. And so that will become, I think, the differentiator, especially as conversations and content continuously becomes easier to produce, is what is the value of the content itself? So the quality of conversation, but then also the packaging. And I think that will iterate and change.
Absolutely.
Maybe we'll be one of the ones paving the way. I'll let you know, or maybe you will.
Sounds great.
Excited to see how it happens.
Love to see it. All right, the last one. What's one buzzword you'd like to retire from the world of finance?
I mentioned it earlier, and this is probably a little bit greatly around software or just truly anything, but oftentimes rolls up to the world of finance, particularly venture capital, is just AI powered. We see that as a headline. It'll be in the H1, H2 of websites all the time. Everything's AI powered. And it used to be that was such a unique edge and differentiator. And then there was a lot of data actually conducted, a lot of A/B tests around the impact of it, and it's diminishing. So it's actually reducing. And eventually, as AI just becomes the status quo, like it's going to be a non-negotiable that your product is AI powered, if not AI native. And so adding that in as a differentiator dissolves. I'm pretty for the dissolution. I think it's inevitable now that everything is AI powered. So it's very cool to actually see the pendulum swinging back to value led of what is this truly solving for a customer, as opposed to the technology that's enabling the value.
Absolutely. Well, day by day, I think we get closer and closer to that. Sophie, we'll have to end there. Thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. You've got such great insights around the world of media, putting this together. I'm sure our audience will get a ton of value out of this. So really appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate you for having me. This was a ton of fun. Thank you, Matt.